Welcome, everyone. This is Becky Sipus, President and CEO of Character.org. I'm glad you could join us today for the second in our series of webinars on how well are we educating for global citizenship. I hope many of you were present at the first webinar, but we'll continue the discussion today, and we have an outstanding panel. I will introduce all of them right now, and then I will give them each the floor. They will have a chance to speak for about 10 minutes, and then you will all have a chance to ask questions. If you think of questions while they are speaking, if you see on your dashboard on the right, you see a question bar. You click on that plus sign. It will open up a text box where you can type in questions that I will see, and we can ask those during the Q&A session. So let me go ahead and introduce our panelists. New today is Libby Giles. She is the Director for Global Citizenship Education at the New Zealand Center for Global Studies. She has been actively engaged with the promotion and development of global citizenship education for some years. Most recently, she has been at the center of a project funded by the New Zealand National Commission for UNESCO, researching the development of global citizenship education, building a community of like-minded individuals and groups, and facilitating student conferences. Also with us today is Joseph Carwin, CEO of World United and Virtuous. Joe is the founder of One World. It's committed to improving human understanding and cooperation. The primary vehicle is the One World Youth Clubs, which serve 500 students in 25 schools in 6 different countries. Their goal is to create a global learning network of leaders of character, knowledgeable of the world around them and capable of changing it for the better. Prior to founding One World, Joe worked in emerging market finance for 30 years with a focus on South America. In addition to his background in finance, Joe recently completed 8 years as town supervisor of the town of Rye. And our third speaker is Tony Devine, Vice President of Education for the Global Peace Foundation. Tony has more than 30 years of leadership experience with non-governmental organizations. He's the founder of the Character and Creativity Initiative that transformed public high schools by exposing faculty and students to an experiential learning environment that builds 21st century leadership skills that prepare youth for the modern workplace and world. This initiative is being developed in Kenya, Uganda, Paraguay, Brazil, Malaysia, Indonesia, Nepal, and the Philippines. Tony is a regular speaker at national and international conferences in more than 25 countries. All 3 of our great panelists are here today to talk about what are the skills needed in today's competitive world. Beyond academics, what are the skills students need, and how can we help develop them? Libby, are you ready to start?
Yes, I am.
Please take it away.
Did you want me to go first, Becky, or do you want Libby to go first?
We talked about Libby going first.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, that's fine. I tell you what, right now I don't have my my presentation in front of me, which I just clicked on it.
You know what, Libby, maybe I should go. Should I go then?
Yeah, you go.
Okay.
Go ahead, Joe.
Terrific. Well, listen, Becky, thank you so much for that nice introduction. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. I'm thrilled to be here to talk about global citizenship. I'm the founder and executive director of One World. Our youth programs are present in 6 countries, operating out of 30 clubs, serving 500 students. Our goal is to educate our students for global awareness, connect them through good character, and empower them through service learning. So today's topic is of particular interest to me, global citizenship. Before I get into it, I just wanted to distinguish between global citizenship as it is versus citizenship of a particular nation state. And obviously, when we talk about global citizenship, there isn't currently any opportunity to be a formal citizen of the world. So when we talk about global citizenship, we're really talking about an ethos, a way of thinking, a way of being, a habit of mind. And when we talk about educating for global citizenship, I wanted to let you know that I'll be using the terms global citizenship and global competence interchangeably. Can everybody see my presentation okay?
Yes.
Good. Okay, so basically global citizenship is an old idea. In fact, it's been around for thousands of years in the form of cosmopolitanism. And cosmopolitanism is the idea that a community of human beings can and possibly should exist. So if it's been around for 1,000 years, why is it so important that we adopt global citizenship today? And I think we all know the world around us has been transformed fundamentally over the last 10 years. Thomas Friedman has been one of the foremost commentators on this process, and he's told us that the world is flat, that we've gone from interconnected to interdependent, and that effectively our youth and our students are competing in a hyper-competitive global economy where average is over. Indeed, globalization is so pervasive, we can't escape it. In fact, we don't really have a choice as to whether or not we're going to be global citizens. We only have a choice as to whether or not we're going to face globalization in an intelligent way. I had the good fortune to go to Harvard 10 days ago for a think tank that was presided over by Fernando Reimers, one of the leading thinkers in this space. And he tells us, as you can see here, that the people that understand the transformations being brought about by globalization can turn them into competitive advantage and benefit from globalization. But those who do not will face real and growing challenges. The president of the National Education Association, Dennis Van Rekkel, tells us that there is an urgency. The 21st century isn't coming, it's already here. He goes on to tell us that global competence is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Global competence needs to become part of the core mission of education, according to the president of the National Education Association. Businesses very clearly need employees that understand the world around them, global citizens if they're going to compete in today's global economy. Now, what does global competence look like? Having been to the think tank at Harvard, I'll use Professor Reimers' definition. And basically what he's telling us here is you need to have an open mind, you need to speak a second language, you need a deep knowledge of the world, both from a historical perspective and a current affairs perspective. He talks about the tripartite or three-dimensional of global competence, or what he calls the three big A's: affect, action, and academic knowledge. And basically affect is what we call character education. Action means it's not enough to understand the world around you, you need to act. You need to do something to be civically engaged to improve both your own community and the communities around the world, and you need to do that from an informed position. If there are three dimensions to global competence, then obviously global citizenship education needs to be multidimensional. And again, he talks about the need for academic knowledge, action, and effect. Now, I'm very pleased that he's taken that tack, because that's completely consistent with what we've been doing, unbeknownst to me and our team of educators for the last 3 years, that we have a consistent view, which I'm thrilled for. So we've been at One World doing what we call ECE, educating for global awareness, connecting through good character, and empowering through service learning. You know, effect, academic knowledge, effect, and action. Now, what's interesting, a lot of you have probably seen this chart already, but basically it's an early adopter chart, and global education is still in its nascent stages. It's still very early days global education, particularly in the United States. I found this next quote very, very interesting. Fareed Zakaria, one of the foremost foreign policy commentators, tells us that while the United States has globalized the world, we may find ourselves, forget to globalize ourselves. So that could be a real tragedy for us. On this next slide, At the bottom of the slide, you can see a partnership of 9 different groups ranging from the Asia Society to the National Middle School Association, where they, again, talk about the need for global competence education, global citizenship education, and it's not just about, in their view, global competitiveness, economic competitiveness, but it's also to achieve world peace and for security reasons. Now, how do we begin to teach global competence? One of the issues we face is not every teacher is ready to teach global competence. So we're going to need a systemic effort that calls on substantial resource if we're going to do this in any kind of effective way. Of course, the problem we have is educators are being challenged as never before. They're overworked and underpaid. I'm confident my teachers on the call will agree with that proposition. Now, the challenge then is, how can we teach global education and global competence without adding to the teaching burden? And I think the only way we're going to be able to do that is to integrate it into the ongoing, overall, everyday curriculum. Oxfam, the British Development Agency, basically brings together some of the concepts we've talked about. One, global citizenship is an ethos, it's an ethic, and secondly, their view is the whole school approach is the best way to move forward. Now, this is an important point in the United States, diversity. As an immigrant nation, we have a huge comparative advantage when it comes to global education. One World, basically 80% of the programs in which we serve, we work in majority minority districts. And we think that minorities in the United States, particularly Latinos who are bilingual and bicultural, have a distinct competitive advantage. I want to repeat that, competitive advantage in today's globalized world. And we think we need to build on that advantage and take that forward. And that's a good way for us to move forward with global education. Now, I didn't want to finish on a negative note. There are 2 states, as most people on the call will know, education in the United States is done at the state level, and there's 2 states that have done it right and made a real effort. The first and leading one is North Carolina. And what did they do? Well, they pulled together a study. The study found 6 major findings. Again, they're saying we're not preparing students for global tomorrow. North Carolina is global today. The 21st century is here. There's an urgency. They made 5 recommendations about how they would go about affecting, they should affect these changes. But what I really like is the quote at the bottom of the page from their state education director, who says, "You have no ability to avoid globalization. So deal with it and deal with it in the best way you can." Washington State's another example. 40% of the jobs in Washington State are derivative of international trade. 40%. And what they found when they looked at their educational system, there's a significant gap between the state's economic pillars and its educational foundation. And what they've done is they've ultimately worked to improve that, and they concluded that global education is key to Washington's future success. I'm going to stop there so we have time for questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. That really gave us a good sense of how global citizenship is really needed today. All right, shall we go over to you, Libby, now, and let's see if we can get your presentation up on the screen?
Yeah, it just disappeared, actually. Hold on. Did you have it a moment ago, my presentation?
I just gave you access, Libby. There we go.
Yeah, it's just, oh, here we go. Oh. Yeah, it's just come back. Can you see it?
Yes.
Good. Okay, thank you very much. I am a citizen of the world, said Diogenes in the 3rd century. This is the original cosmopolitan individual that Joe has just referred to. So this is not a new idea. Universalism has been since time immemorial. The world is my country and my religion is to do good, were Thomas Paine's words of man. And a nice reflection on this idea for the 21st century is captured by François Hollande, the French president, at the end of the Paris climate change negotiation. What brings us together is the planet itself. This represented a sea change in thinking that shows that the national interest can't even be met until the planetary interest is recognized. I won't go through all of my slides in the interest of time. The rationale for global citizenship education is clear. Global competence is required. In order to meet the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century, students need to have values and skills. We can't have unfettered globalization without the preparedness to act responsibly. Most national curricula are consistent with the tenets of global citizenship education. Most certainly in New Zealand, we have an equal part of our curriculum that requires that we produce young people who are independent and creative thinkers, who have values, skills, and key competencies. This area is I think, often given token importance, and I think this is an area that we need to work on more. Most national curricula rest on the basic 4 pillars of UNESCO: learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together. UNESCO is a promising organisation here that I think can be made more use of. It has an associated schools project network that reaches to 180 countries and 10,000 schools. It supports global citizenship education and recognises that global citizenship education is the way forward for states to meet their international requirements under the Global First Initiative, Education First Initiative, and the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular 4.7, to do with quality education. The how to do it is always the more difficult thing, and I think, as Joe has already referred to, teachers feel already overwhelmed by the amount of work that they need to do. But what's a kind of a disconnect here is that there are these aspirations for holistic learning that ram up against a wall of assessment, and this is a disconnect. We need to be valuing education beyond assessment and teaching the whole child. This has to be done through every aspect of the school community. It can't just be in the classroom. Global citizenship education can't be dropped in as a subject within the social science faculty, for example. So global citizenship education must develop questioning skills in our young people, critical thinking. They need to have ethics. The future pathways for them, for their careers, will require an ethical framework of thinking. We're able to do things at a much faster rate than we can figure out whether or not we should be. This is vitally important. There are misconceptions about what global citizenship education is as well, and it's not too difficult for children to understand. It's not about other places and other people. It's not about raising money for charity. It's about moving from us and them to we. It's about being responsible. There are quite a number of barriers. I think that at an academic level there's a great amount of work being done on the rationale, and there are individual groups doing incredible work, but a lot of links need to be made, and the closer you get to schools, the bigger you realise the knowledge gaps that there are. I want to move on really, before we get to questions and discussions, to a recent world trip that I've had. I was lucky enough to be funded by UNESCO to visit a number of groups, schools, individuals around the world to talk about global citizenship education, the development of it, in my role as education director at the New Zealand Centre for Global Studies. The trip took me to 10 cities in 9 countries in 4 regions of the world, and the commonalities were startling. There are incredible works going on in places, all with similar challenges and similar opportunities. I'm highlighting this slide here is from Shanghai High School, where it's an incredibly competitive school. It's really got the creme de la creme of Chinese students. It has an international school and a local school on the same campus. The local school mimics quite a bit of the work that the international school does in terms of its social action. And in some cases, they've taken their environmental projects to the local municipality, who have taken them on board and implemented them in the city of Shanghai. I see this as an enormous example of the kind of change that can be made and the kind of future leadership that we can bring to our young people. Here are some highlights from my trip. There's some pictures here from John F. Kennedy Elementary School in Port Chester, and schools in Shanghai, Beijing, Paris. You can see the blow-up gymnasium on the bottom left is a place where students in Beijing can breathe some clean air when the pollution's too high. Here again, Paris, Victor Hugo School, which is a UNESCO ASP.NET school. It's another international school, very keen to collaborate and work with schools around the world and students in conferencing and taking part in big decision-making at UN levels. UNESCO is a large organisation that has a great potential. It needs a lot of help. It needs several countries to be on board, and it needs to work with other organisations as well. Within its own framework, it has arms that are doing some incredibly helpful work. The UPCU, you see in the top left corner, is the Asia Pacific Centre for Education and International Understanding based in Seoul, where they have capacity building and teacher training and training for teacher educators as well. There's a plethora of resources available there. There's ACCU in Tokyo, which is a similar kind of organisation, focusing largely on education for sustainable development. The Sustainable Development Goals can be seen here. 4 on quality education, 4.7 in particular, the one that refers to global citizenship education. The University for Peace is located in Costa Rica. I was lucky enough to visit there as well. And here they have 100 graduate students working on areas around conflict resolution and peace studies. And there are some wonderful education for sustainable development and global citizenship education programs running here also. The world is full of people working in this area. The connections are not quite being made in the way they need to be. It is organic and chaotic, and that's kind of how the globalized network world is that we're in now. But it's up to groups like us to work together to promote and develop global citizenship education. This is not a nice add-on, this is a requirement. We do need this. Students need to be globally competent to be ready for university and ready for the world. Thank you. Oh, sorry, this is, we've also been running student conferences on global citizenship education. These are the students from our first conference who had a retreat where they wrote a report on how they see being global citizens in the 21st century. This is their statement of intent. We've just had another conference that was larger thanks to the UNESCO grant, with up to 100 students from around New Zealand. And we are looking forward to another one on the 1st of July that will capture in the creative arts. Thank you.
Thank you, Libby. It's very inspirational to hear of so many initiatives that you have visited going around the world. And now let's turn the stage over to Tony Devine. Tony?
Yes, thank you very much, Becky, and to Joe and to all the presenters. Really delighted to be on our second webinar here today, and want to talk about how the world is changing. Our work, as we work in 8 countries on the area of transforming education around the world, we're very much focused on working with educators and change makers. You know, at the grassroots level, we're working with ministries of education and even with international organizations to help ensure that our students globally graduate ready to succeed in all aspects of their life and in the 21st century. And the goal here is to make education very relevant so that graduates are better prepared to contribute to economic employment and economic development, societal and political stability, and to contribute to creating ethical societies free from corruption. Corruption, big issue around the world, as you probably know. Some recent surveys from the world of businesses and universities and colleges show that there is a mismatch between education and work. One Gallup poll here from 2014 shows that 96% of college and university chief academic officers are extremely or somewhat confident in their institution's ability to prepare students for success in the workforce. However, another Gallup Lumina Foundation poll showed that only 11% of business leaders state that today's college graduates do not have the skills and competencies that business needs. So what are these skills that companies are looking for? And this is a very essential part of the work of education, is to prepare students for the modern global workforce. And we're talking about a workforce and a world that's interconnected like never before. This is data from the Best Great Places to Work Institute. Over the past 20 years, they survey the best companies to work for, like Google, Salesforce, Cisco, American Express, Marriott Hotels, and many, many other well-known companies. Here are the trends that these companies are looking for. They're looking for, the trends are very much focused on collaboration and teamwork. They want employees who can solve problems, who approach work with a sense of purpose. The era of the knowledge worker is over. It's now the era of the relationship worker, because the information you need to solve problems is not coming from you alone anymore. It's coming from your ability to network, collaborate with others. Ownership, communication, leadership, engagement, and several others. This is an interesting study from the Economist Intelligence Unit. This was a global survey that was done across 25 countries last year. They interviewed senior business executives, they interviewed teachers in these 25 countries, and they interviewed high school students and college students. And this is a summary of the global skills that are needed. Problem solving, team working, communication, critical thinking, creativity, leadership, entrepreneurship, emotional intelligence, lifelong learners, and so on. So in our work, as we work in 8 out of the 25 countries on the education area around the world, as Becky described in the beginning, we came up with a set of essential leadership standards that align with the 21st century requirements of the modern workforce and world. And this set includes this set of leadership standards: character, creativity, purpose, relationships, and learning. And this is the work we are working with in schools around the world on right now. On the character area, very specifically, we've honed in on integrity, respect, resilience, and conscientiousness. On the creativity side, which is very important, innovation, problem solving, and critical thinking. And you'll see as I go through this how this aligns with the trends and with the surveys that are being done around the world. Purpose, students having a sense of vision, ownership, being motivated, self-motivated. And relationships, as I said earlier, we're in the world of the relationship worker, where students have to communicate. They have to collaborate. You have to collaborate and work with others. Teamwork is so critically important. And also a sense of connectedness in the school, but also in the workplace as well. And just outside the school too, with the local community. In the school sense through service learning, in the corporate world through corporate social responsibility. And finally, learning. We want our students to be competent and also to reflect on their learning, that it is relevant. It's not just being done in an abstract ivory tower kind of way. We want to create the total child with these leadership competencies of purpose, character, creativity, learning, and relationships. And the total child, of course, comes from the total school. And we want teachers and the leadership team to model these standards, these leadership standards, and the characteristics and competencies, that are associated with it. This is not going to work by teaching a course on leadership standards alone. It has to be modeled, practiced to get your feet wet, so to speak. In terms of like the success of a person in life, you know, on the right-hand side, you see the traditional content strands that characterize education around the world. You know, reading, writing, math, science, and technology. Education has been like this for centuries. These are the tangibles, and that pretty much makes up about 20% of what it means to be successful, but it is the intangibles, these leadership standards of character, creativity, purpose, relationships, and learning that really define if a person is going to be successful, effective, and actually happy in their life. This has to be measured. So on our end, we have created a survey. We're in the final stages of developing the reliability and validity of that survey to measure these leadership standards. And then just a few points on how do we cultivate these kinds of 21st century leadership standards in schools. First of all, building a positive culture, getting the leadership team, the teachers, the students, parents, the community, all working together in a comprehensive way. Ongoing capacity building, we need new types of leadership training for teachers, for school principals, the leadership team, to nurture and cultivate these kinds of qualities. The current standards are not enough, and it also requires a collective effort. Working, you know, having cross-sectional engagement and a more systematic approach. Also, new implementation approaches are needed. We need to shift from the current rigid to a more holistic approach to develop these kinds of global leadership standards. Another thing, too, is to solve real practical problems rather than abstract ones, and hands-on learning that mirrors the real world. An example of a project we're doing that we're piloting in Kenya right now that accentuates this is a project called LeapHubs. This is a converted classroom in schools. We're working in about 24 schools right now in Nairobi and across the country with LeapHubs. And teams of students, they work in teams of 5 to start businesses and social enterprises. These are high school students now. They're mentored by college students. They're mentored by leaders in industry and business, technology companies. We're working with Google, Intel, you know, and other companies to provide the mentorship that these students need. There's 96 business ideas in cultivation right now. So it's a really good example of having students work on real problems, developing real ideas that relate to the world. And just 2 more points I want to make here is that education is a complex social problem, and our traditional approaches have not worked. You have government, ministries of education, the corporate and the social sector kind of working in isolation. Problem is not being solved. So we're advocating for public-private social partnerships where you know, districts of education, ministries of education, the private sector, the world of education work together in a collaborative way so that we can actually make this joint shift and create this revolution that's needed. The world is changing very, very fast in the 21st century. That's the red line here. But the world of education, the gray line here, we're kind of still stuck in the 19th and 20th century to a large degree. And we need to have a matched red line here where we're moving at the same speed to transform education globally. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Tony. Well, I love that last diagram. That red line is such a contrast to the circuitous gray line of the traditional education path. Again, I invite all of the listeners to type in their questions in the question box. I do have one question already from Tamara Abraham from the Global Peace Talks Initiative. And the question is, what plans and modalities do we have in place for expanding alternative education technology learning skills worldwide? So, Joe, can you talk a little bit about that first?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So basically, what we'll be doing is just moving forward with our programming. As I mentioned, we currently have 30 youth clubs in 6 countries, and we've designed the program in a way that we can scale it up at not a lot of cost. So basically, our first goal would be to expand the number of clubs. Our real goal is to create a global learning community where basically we have leaders of character, knowledgeable of the world around them, and capable of changing it for the better. So we'll look to expand our network. The other thing we're doing is we're also deepening the program. We launched our first whole school model this year, so we're doing that. And finally, we're trying to take advantage of technology to make the growth more automatic. So basically, just trying to spread the message as much as possible. I know Libby might have an answer because she was trying to organize something in Paris later this year.
Right, Libby?
Yeah, I think there is, I mean, at an international organizational level, there is quite a lot going on, and I've referred to UNESCO already. UNICEF also does some work, Oxfam that's also been referred to, the OECD. So there are some international structural things going on. Of course, that's an area that's kind of under change as well, because we're needing to move from international relations to some kind of global governance. But there is movement there. But I think it can't be done alone. And as Tony's talked about, public-private social partnerships. I think the social quite often gets missed out. I know in New Zealand there's often talk about public-private partnerships, but I think it does have to be all three. From my perspective, I think I agree with Joe, increasing the networks. It's building a community. This has to be done from every angle, and I think just in the same way as we're moving from the industrialized, structured world to this network, globalized, chaotic one, these initiatives will spring up around the world.
Thank you. I have another question here. Do you know of any countries that are incorporating global education units or focus that are requirements for graduate teachers to facilitate the systematic evolution of global education in everyday schools? Focusing on preparation for teachers as a requirement in global education. Any thoughts on that? Tony, do you know of any?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that. In Kenya right now, I was just there recently. I'm going there again next week. I'm going to be attending an Africa-wide conference on education innovation, where Ministry of Education, nonprofits, education providers, private schools, public schools are all going to be there wrestling with the questions we're dealing with on this call here today. And just related to that last question we had too, I think, and going back to the public-private social partnerships, I think that's really a key here. Oftentimes the social partner in this equation can come up with the innovative models, but it's only the Ministry of Education that have the capacity and the resources to scale those models across the country. So for example, we're working very closely right now with the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development. It's a major department of the Ministry of Education there that's responsible for actually coming up with a new education system that's going to be 21st century skills based. And we've been working with them to look at some of the innovations that's going on in the demonstration schools we're working with, and they've accepted to do that. So we're very encouraged, about that. I'm going to this current question about teachers developing the skills to do this. This would absolutely be a requirement. In fact, there was a huge meeting about a month and a half ago in Kenya to gather together 1,000 practitioners and educational leaders, and a central part of that meeting was the desperate need to retrain teachers so that they will be qualified to go about the world of teaching and learning in a completely new way that actually mirrors a lot of what happens in companies and so on, where the teacher is a master facilitator rather than just somebody that's downloading content. So a lot of work has to be done to map that out and to start that transformation of education. It's very, very behind right now, but I'm encouraged by recent efforts and at least a willingness to try to tackle this very critical question here.
Thank you. And if I may interject, it's not a teacher prep requirement, but one of the purposes of our National Forum on Character Education, our national conference this fall, is to bring educators together just to learn about these things. That is one focus of our International Summit that I hope many of you on the call will be able to attend. My next question from a listener, do you know of any longitudinal studies that have followed students who have participated in schools or countries that have a greater global education focus to see if there's any quantifiable benefits to society?
Could I just, there's a book by, I'm just casting my memory back here, a book by a guy called Mark Gerzon, or other, I don't know if other people are aware of this, on global citizens, and there is some data in there actually from the United States that shows raised achievement levels in students who have had access to global citizenship education, particularly for minority groups.
Well, that's interesting. What was the name of that book again?
Global Citizens, I think, by Mark Gerzon.
Okay. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I think this area is so very new. I mean, we've been talking about 21st century leadership skills and global citizenship skills for many, many, many years. I think it's just really in the last year or so that I've noticed as I travel around the world, I'm seeing educational leaders, ministries of education talking a lot about it nowadays in conferences and other meetings that I'm attending. So the good news is that really for the first time, they're talking about it and talking to others about it and very curious about it and recognizing the need to get things done. We've done some studies ourselves, on it's not longitudinal. It's over a period of a year or two that evaluated the impact of 21st century leadership skills in schools. The impact is very, very positive. We noticed that academic performance has gone up, social problems are gone down, teachers are more motivated, satisfied to be in the school, student dropout is down. And these are the things we can expect when schools can transform their culture along these lines. Longitudinal studies are very, very expensive to do, and I would love to see some studies done on this topic specifically.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is basically the same. Tony's absolutely right. This is so new. We've been doing this for about 6 or 7 years, so it's all anecdotal. What was fun, we launched a leadership institute 2 years ago, and so the students we had as elementary schoolers, as one-worlders who did other things like band and soccer or whatever, came back and joined us with our leadership institute a few years later when they were older, and it sparked in part by their very positive experience with the One World Club at the elementary school level. But it's all anecdotal at this point.
That's nice. The next question, go ahead, somebody want to say something else?
Yeah, there's no question about it, and it's that employers are absolutely demanding and looking, probably in the last, I would say in the last year or two, in a very, very intentional, pronounced way. They're looking for these leadership standards on resumes. They're interviewing in a very different way. They don't care about the content area so much anymore. That's important, but having these leadership standards and these citizenship standards that we're talking about here on the call there's no question about it, at the small, medium, and large corporate levels, employment levels, employers at all levels are actually requiring, demanding, and looking for these kind of leadership competencies in students, in their new employees.
And Becky, if I could just add, Tony's absolutely correct. And for those that are K through 12 educators, so are the universities. So we had an instance this year where one of our students applied to Harvard and they asked for an international experience and he didn't have one. So he wrote up his experience with the One World and fortunately got accepted. So I think not just employers but universities are looking for this kind of thing as well.
Interesting. Well, that makes the next question, I think, even more important. This person wants to know how we can integrate the purposes you have as a foundation to a country such as Mexico, who might be considered a third world country. How do you get started in a country to build this commitment?
Well, actually, Mexico is interesting. We do operate in Mexico. We've organized a number of video conferences between Mexico and the United States. In fact, you may remember, Becky, we got an award from character.org because we organized a conference around the Universal Declaration of Human Rights between Mexico, and this is after 43 students had lost their lives in Acapulco. I have to say the other interesting thing is Mexico has a civic education program, so what we've been doing is working with them to bring global citizenship education into that. And one thing I can say, we have a group of professors and teachers listening from Mexico right now. There was about 10 gathered for the last call, and they're gathered around now, and I can't tell you how terrific they are as educators. They're absolutely wonderful educators. So there's clearly, in fact, actually our experience has been that global citizenship education is viewed much more favorably overseas than it is in the United States. So I think Mexico is just as attuned and just as ready to move forward. It's just a question of finding the right people and taking it forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. We've been getting a lot of calls. In fact, we had some schools in Mexico that wanted to participate in our Schools of Character process, so we went and evaluated. So there's definitely a lot of interest there. Does anybody else want to add anything about
can I just add to that as well?
Go ahead,
Mexico has a really active ASP.NET. I think I met delegates from Mexico at 2 UNESCO conferences, and I think there may be up to 500 schools that belong to the ASP.NET. The other thing is there was a recent study done by the OECD that shows a marked increase in the number of people in the world identifying as global citizens. And interestingly, the numbers in developing countries are rising who identify as global citizenship, and in places like Germany declining a little. So that's an interesting view as well.
What we do in the countries we're working with, or in any country too, is we go in, we talk to key educational leaders, we talk to the Ministry of Education in those countries, and then we get our feet wet. We actually take on about 10 to 20 demonstration schools, with the support of the Ministry of Education, and work with these school principals and teachers who are typically very willing to work with us in this regard, and get this kind of model up and running, so that, and then it's very critically important to be able to keep the Ministry of Education and different departments of the Ministry of Education very engaged and to keep communicating with them. Sometimes it's a very frustrating process because the ministry moves at a much slower pace than companies do, or than NGOs like ours on the call at the rate we move. But you can't dismiss them, you can't ignore them, you've got to engage with them and be patient, because they're the ones that have the capacity to scale. And we found, like just in the case of Kenya, we're working in Paraguay, going through a very painstaking process over the last 7 to 10 years of building those relationships, keep communicating, get him to come to the schools, and we're seeing it to start. We're seeing the fruit of that work, where the ministry is now starting to get it, so to speak, right? So that's very important.
So nice segue to the next question. The next questioner wants to do some research overseas, and he or she wants to know what you would recommend as schools or organizations to visit to see best practice in action. So Libby, could you start, because you knew so many.
Yeah, well, I'm starting to put together quite a good list, so it might be quite. I would be more than happy to get in, to be contacted about this. Where's a good place to start? Gosh, you know what? I feel like I just scratched the surface on my trip. There is so much out there when you go looking. But you can...
Libby, would Singapore be a place?
Singapore would be good. Yeah, Singapore would be good. Korea, I think Korea is really good because because of UPSIU, they've actually got a really, really good database of connected groups and institutions.
We have, for this question, we have demonstration schools that are working on these models. In Kenya, there's 24 schools there already. Also in Uganda, we have about 9 schools. In Malaysia, about 12 schools, all in the capital city, by the way. And then in Paraguay, in Asuncion, we have about 10 schools that we're working very, very deeply with. Another 40 that we're working in an interrelated way with. We also have schools in Indonesia as well, plus other countries. So anyway, in our case, we have real schools that we're working with on this, and with the support of the Ministry of Education for this kind of research, for more research like this to be done in these schools.
That's an excellent suggestion, and our clubs are located in Kyrgyzstan, Uganda, Ethiopia, Mexico, and China. And the questioner wants to get in touch with us. I'm happy to facilitate contact with our people on the ground.
Yeah, likewise here.
Great. So to our listeners, there are 3 great people to talk to for more specifics. The next question really acknowledges what you said about educators protesting that this is just one more thing to add to their very full plates. And this questioner talks about the need to bring the separated subjects together to view the issues in all their complexity. So do you think there needs to be time for this integration? Even if you put it in your subject matter, you still have to cover your curriculum. How do you bring the global education together in its complexity? Do you need to have time for discussion among subjects?
Yes, you do. I think the interdisciplinary learning is key to this, and I think that the teachers need to be able to talk to each other. So we're still so stuck in silos in education, and quite often teachers are doing incredibly connected things, but they don't know about each other. So there needs to be professional development learning time for that. And I think also that actually we need to be valuing what's already being done. Because the worst thing you can do is come and drop some new initiative into a school and say, hey, this is what we're doing now. When in fact, many of the teachers are already doing it and doing it in an incredibly good way. It's just that those links need to be made across, not only across the faculties, but in the whole ethos of the school and the wider school community as well. And I think at the same time, there needs to be professional development on how to facilitate controversial discussions, how to facilitate questioning in classes as well.
Yeah, I agree with Libby that this has to be cross-disciplinary, and what we're talking about here on this call, the 21st century leadership skills and character and so on we're talking about, it's not an add-on actually. It is not a subject that you teach one. That doesn't work. That's cognitive-based education. What we're talking about here is experiential-based education. It means that it needs to be a whole new approach where teachers model this stuff. So the great news here is that any teacher on the call today can start this right away in the subject area that they're doing it, but by modeling these kind of characteristics, by being that really great master facilitator, right, by creating getting their students to work in collaborative teams, right, reaching out to another teacher or two teachers or three teachers and collaborating with them, meet them once a week and discuss what does it take to be a great teacher in the modern world, right? So there's unlimited ways that teachers, leadership teams, principals, they can take on these leadership characteristics right now, this minute, without the permission of anybody, and transform your classroom and your schools.
Just start somewhere.
The only thing I would add, Becky, is that in terms of global citizenship or global competence, clearly teachers need to be supported, and I'm thinking that, same way you have a technology consultant potentially at the district level or even higher, you probably should have a global education specialist that could support each of the teachers and help them integrate, global citizenship thoughts and ideas into the curricula.
I would agree with that, and I'd go further and say that each school should have a global citizenship facilitator, which was an appointment. I was that in my last school, and that way, just like you have a sports coordinator or anything else, you can be making the links. You can be infiltrating the faculties and working. In Korea, they have a system. They've really, really embraced global citizenship there, and from the president down, they're talking about it. And they have a system where they have lead teachers from provinces being trained, and then them going back and spreading the training within the provinces.
Well, these sound like fantastic. Having a global citizenship director or a coach at a school sounds like a fabulous idea. Our next questioner thinks that maybe the global goals are too optimistic given the current state of global citizen education around the world, and they'd like that the focus seems to be so much more on core academic attainment in most education systems. Do you think that we're being too optimistic to push the global citizenship?
Tony here, absolutely not. As I mentioned in my last slide here, we really need a revolution in education here. So I think we all have to be optimistic. And more people are talking about this. Companies are demanding it. You have ministries of education talking about it. I think teachers, leadership teams are becoming aware of it. And guess what? The students are already in the 21st century. They're online 24/7. They already are knowledgeable about this stuff, right? So all the pieces of the puzzle are on the board right now. All we have to do is just put them together. This time is very, very unique. There's never been a time like this before, ever, in the world of education. All the pieces are there. I think it's just a matter of collaborating, excuse me, putting them together, and things can start to happen. I'm seeing, excuse me, I'm seeing things starting to happen already in the countries we're working with.
I couldn't agree with Tony more, and I think that I think it's a no-brainer that this kind of education will raise achievement anyway. But the other thing is, it's a different world we live in. We can't keep treating children like economic units and measuring their success in that way. We have to change the thinking if they're going to be equipped to change the world.
I think that is a perfect line, and I looked at the clock. We're nearing the end of our time. I would like to thank our wonderful panelists today for their knowledge and sharing such interesting, stimulating ideas. And I want to remind everyone there is a third webinar in this series. It will be held in September. We don't have the exact date yet, but we will send that out. Also, today's webinar was recorded, so you will have an opportunity, if you didn't quite catch everything, to play it again, to look at the slides, and absorb all that wonderful information. And again, I invite you to take a look at character.org's website. Our national conference is having a big focus this year on citizenship in all its aspects: digital citizenship, global citizenship, citizenship of your own community. And the International Summit, we will revisit many of these topics, and I hope that many of you can participate. Tony, Joe, Libby, thank you so much for everything today. Do you have last words before we go? Libby.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I'm really grateful to be invited into this webinar and to meet even more people who are working towards this.
Joe?
I look forward to more.
I just want to thank everybody for participating. Becky, thank you for being such a terrific moderator. And I did want to encourage people to think about the Character.org conference in October. I think character education goes hand in hand with global competence and global citizenship. And one of the things we're going to try and do in October is see if we can agree on some universal values that go across humanity. So thank you so much, Becky, Tony, and Libby, and thank you everybody for listening.
And Tony, last word.
Yeah, thank you, Joe, Becky, Libby. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate all the attendees as well. I think this webinar series is, we came up with this idea recently, and I think it's a great way for us to engage more and more people around the world. And that's what we need, more conversations along these lines and more networking. So I'm very encouraged by what we're doing here today.
And I'm sorry I didn't get to everyone's questions, but I think it was a thoughtful discussion. So thank you and goodbye.